morning and welcome back to the lecture series. We are discussing short story and novel. We are trying to understand them on a comparative basis. We are looking at these two forms, the short story and the novel. We have already discussed them separately. Now we are going to make a we are going to attempt a comparative understanding of the two genres. So let's see what Edgar Allan Poe has to say. According to Poe, a short story should be no longer than can be read in a single sitting. It should provide a single and a unique effect. And then Poe goes on to say that if his, meaning the author's very initial sentence, tend not to the outbringing of this effect, then he has failed in his first step. In the whole composition, there should be no word written of which the tendency, direct or indirect, is not to the one pre-established design, unquote. So, when we talk about the short story, we are talking about a pre-established design, the theme, the plot that has been envisioned by the author beforehand. Poe draws on Schlegel in observing that the short story rests on the fact that understanding of the whole precedes understanding of the parts, and yet that from which no part can be displaced without ruining the whole. So Poe draws on Schlegel in observing that the short story rests on the fact that understanding of the whole precedes understanding of the parts, and yet that from which no part can be displaced without ruining the whole. According to Georg Lukács, the quality of perceiving the pattern or all-encompassing discourse before perceiving the parts makes the short story the most purely artistic form. So, short stories' onus is largely on the aesthetic pattern, right? The overall design or plan rather than the finer mimetic details comprising insignificant individual actions. C.S. Lewis states that short story becomes a story through a series of events, and yet through these events the reader is supposed to grasp something else that is beyond the sequence and something that is larger than these mundane narrations, these mundane details, an overarching theme or symbol that binds the story together. So the events are a means to this broader meaning or the symbol or the archetype, and this is the end that a successful short story seeks. Beyond the events, the meaning renders a state or a quality to the short story. Events, when placed one after another, leads to this very significance, the larger meaning. On the other hand, we have the good novel, which is closer in a way to real life, right? In real life, the succession of everyday events are by chance, they are arbitrary, and mostly do not always translate to a meaning of larger significance. At least at the immediate level, such a meaning is neither embodied nor obvious. And the novel, like I said, the modern novel tries to emulate the flawed existence that life is, right? For Ernest Hemingway, short story is a modern art form that is spare and concrete, and yet it is riddled with meaning. Alfred Edgar Coppard notes that short story is a totality which the writer possesses even before writing the very first sentence, unlike in the case of the novel, where the ending is not known to the author. The ending is something that the author is trying to pursue all the time, and through this discovery, through this journey, of novel writing, the novelist is in a way discovering an aspect of himself that was hitherto unknown to him or to her. So Catherine Annie Porter confesses that she writes the first page or the first paragraph of a short story first and then works backwards. According to Edgar Coppard, if the same plot is transcribed to a novel, so if a plot of a given short story is transcribed to a novel, such a narrative will need to turn mere episodes into epic stature, where the length will be covered with factitious psychological readings and bogus mysticism that one can actually do away with. So we have different authors who have their own, who have their owners, who have their own, liking and disliking regarding the different genres. The ones that prefer short stories consider the novel as full of factitious, extraneous information that could be done away with. On the other hand, the novelist says that what is the story is a question that only a layman, a non-literary person can ask. The novel does not focus on the story, obviously. The novel is more about the stylistic devices, and to be able to appreciate that, one needs to have certain skills as a reader, as a literary person. So one needs to be trained in a way in order to understand, grasp and appreciate the modern and the postmodern novel. Next, I would go to Rabindranath Tagore's definition of short story. He has his own collection of short stories, and when we quote him in Bengali, he says, "Nahi তত্ত্ব nahi upodesh অন্তরে অতৃপ্ত রবে সাঙ্গ করি মনে হবে শেষ হয়েও হইল না শেষ." So when translated, it means no theories, no didacticism. The reader's heart will desire for more. After completing the reading, one would think it ended, yet it did not. Early 20th century has sometimes regarded short stories as a cheap bag of tricks, and short story has also been tagged as O-Henryism, with manipulative surprise endings. So we have, like I already said, different different groupings, even among the authors, and some prefer short story to the novel and vice versa. Mercia Eliot notes that short story has a sacred element and is like a momentary perception of spirit, a sudden epiphany, a sudden revelation or realization that occurs towards the end of the short story. On the other hand, according to Eliot, novel develops from the short story, and therefore it is more like a structured theological framework. So she is looking at novel and short story so Eliot is looking at novel and short story through the lens of religion and spirituality, while short story is like a momentary revelation, a spiritual realization. Novel is more like an established, institutionalized religion whose framework, whose premises are clearly laid out. According to Philip Wheelwright, short story traces back to myths, as the latter expresses an inner meaning through telling a story. Sacred motivation of short stories persisted throughout the Middle Ages in the form of small verse narratives. We have several examples in Old and New Testaments of Bible, such as Genesis, Exodus, Judith, which draw on the Judeo-Christian myth and they emphasize the moral purpose. So Boccaccio's The Decameron marks a shift of the short fiction from the religious to the secular during the Renaissance period. The Renaissance that had its inception in Italy in 1492, and in England, in the English literature in 1886. From Dante's Divine Comedy to Boccaccio's The Decameron, we see this shift from the ultra or suprahuman to the profane world of everyday reality. So there is a marked, departure from the world of spirits to the world of nature, from God and discussion on from God and discussion on providence to chance occurrence. 15th century onward, the short narrative shifts from poetry to prose, and its purpose moves away from moral edification to entertainment. So we see that it's coming down from the divine or spiritual plane to address the mundane, issues. Or it becomes part of the mundane matter. It incorporates mundane topics. Short fiction in mid 17th century England is precursor of 18th century realist novel. As a result of French influence, there was a growing interest in psychological analysis, seeing literary work as very similitude with life. So, word transcribing or word as a reflection of the world. The age of Romanticism is marked by the folk tale, which hitherto existed as a received story in vacuum. Now we see during the Romantic period, this received story is infused with the voice and subjectivity of the storyteller and the poet. So during the Romanticism, values of the myth can be seen through the imagination of the artist and the teller, the agency, the figure, the individual presence of the artist, the mediation of the artist in telling story, narratorial voice of the storyteller becomes very, very important. This is one phenomenon that is observable during Romanticism, during the Romantic period. So, real speaker speaking from his subjective position, that is the figure of the artist and the storyteller. The artist's mediation turns the profane and mundane into sacred and out of the ordinary, which leads to the short story, right? Even as the artist is talking about ordinary things of life, something that one encounters on a daily basis, there is the artistic touch, the artist's fineness, skills that make a sacred and extraordinary out of the mundane, and that goes into the artistic process of churning out the short story. The Romantic movement gave rise to the Gothic literature that focused on the insane and the fantastic. So, with the rise of the Gothic fiction in the 18th century, the precursors of short stories such as myths, verse narratives, medieval sermons and romance, folk tales, fables, ballads, all of these forms came into being. Early 19th century short stories are full of archetypal and pictorial characters that undergo pattern ventures, right? Their ventures, their adventures, misadventures have, a pattern, and certain stock characters, stock motives keep coming back. The extraordinary journeys have a deep analogy with myths. Towards the end of the 19th century, with the emergence of the modern short story form, there is a revolutionary change where characters reflect mundane actions without any development. So, the end of the short story per se could be separated from the rest of the narration, and characterized by an epiphany, the end in itself as a sudden revelation or realization. This is something that we see a lot in James Joyce's writings. By the end of the 19th century, short stories make a shift to phenomenology, where the writer's representation of reality is overruled by the representation of experience of individual characters. So we don't have one perspective anymore. We have the question of inter-illumination coming in, the characters illuminating into each other's souls, into each other's possibilities and perspectives. The authorial or narratorial voice is replaced duly by the characters' voices. The narrative becomes more layered. So the question of polyglossia, the question of voices coming from different quarters arise. The author conceals herself and the entire narrative from the point of view of a character within the story. So the author's voice could be well hidden within the story, within the plot itself. The author could garb as one of the characters and posit his or her point of view through the character. As a result, experience of reality becomes subjective and elusive. With the question of phenomenology, the phenomenological experience, reality is more elusive, it is more relative, more subjective. There is the absolutist meaning is gone. So this is also something we have already discussed that interests the modern fiction. Reality as not absolute, but existing only as a relative meaning or a relative truth. Post Anton Chekhov, so Chekhov died in 1904. We are talking about early 20th century short stories, and they depend on metaphoric meanings of events and objects. They can attain closure aesthetically rather than phenomenologically. Further, well into 20th century, we see postmodernism reflects in short stories through the feature of the anti-story, where plots are often struggling with cause and effect relationships, characters are burdened with artifice, and complex symbolic meanings are being formed through these characters. Linearity is flouted, it is replaced by time arrested in an eternal present where the story is struggling to move forward. According to Joseph Frank, now Frank devises this concept of spatial forms. According to Frank, modernist literary works, particularly those by T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, and James Joyce, all these works are informed by spatial forms insofar as they replace history and impede linear narrative sequence, disrupting the normal or the normative meaning of continuity that has been encountered hitherto in English prose. And this continuity is revisited, this continuity is frustrated through disjunctive syntactic arrangements. Such texts, such modernist works are characterized by simultaneity and discontinuity. Modern works of fiction bear certain signs, reference, and connections that are embedded in the text, which organize as gestalt groupings. Right? The reader can grasp these groupings through responding with a sense of spatial form. So, a narrative, a work that is being, approached in terms of the meaning exuded from its spatiality, its spatial meaning. So the focus being on the spatial meaning. Let's see what the Gestalt principle says. According to the Gestalt principle, regularities that appeal to our vision, auditory, or somatosensory perceptions formulate a complex scene or regular objects in terms of subwholes, in terms of certain groupings, which could further be composed of smaller wholes. So, we are looking here at a pattern where we have a circle described by a larger circle and so forth. According to the Gestalt principle theory, uh, we interpret any random image in terms of sensory cues such as proximity, similarity, continuity, closure, and connectedness. So, in literary works, artworks, Darcy Thompson sees these sensory cues as enabling responses to the riddles of form and the problems of morphology. Here we are, I mean, entering into the structuralist discussion, where the basic premise of the structuralist school is that the world is available as in the form of a lot of information that flows into us at very high frequency, and unless we classify these informations, so it's very difficult for us to grasp the meaning unless we categorize the arbitrary way in which the world exists. We have structures inside our heads that enable us to organize the meaning of the world out there. So, Joseph Frank has been opposed by several critics that view time and not space as the primary organizing principle. So, we have these two kinds of reaction towards Joseph Frank's, uh, understanding of a narrative in and around the meanings of space, while the advocates of Frank's theory understand a number of modernist texts that are anti-temporal in nature. Critics of Frank argue that spatiality renders some form of staticity and atemporalness, thereby freezing the narrative. We have to understand that spatiality does not always deny temporality. Narrating time and the temporal language requires a mediation of space and spatial imagery as well. We could have the example of Joyce's Ulysses, where the narrative provides an overriding sense of time as a conjunction of clock and calendar is constantly governing the passing of a day, a single day, which the entire novel is all about. It's the entire novel dwells on a single day from the life of a man, right? On the other hand, we have a work like Madame Bovary. We have discussed how Flaubier's Madame Bovary functions so much without time that it almost imperils Flaubier's position as a novelist. There are no dates except one in the entire novel, and time is available only in the form of spirits and seasons, whereas description of space is through a bland nature that allegorically reflects Emma's state of mind. So, most critics would agree that due to a time space limitation, the short story's mystery or problem is generally unsupported by a social framework, and that its progression depends on a formal pattern and structure. So, the elements of the strange or unheard of plays a vital role, acts as a spur to the short story narration, which or its propellant is, through departing from the ordinary. So, it is a departure from everydayness, from the prosaic state. Terry Eagleton observes that while the novel invests more into the processes, the underlying events, the short story's asset is the shock that is caused by the desire, whose impact would be dampened by lengthy and realist elaborations. Too much of description, and we have diluted the short story enough and beyond redemption. So, while realism's onus is the reassuringly familiar, short stories' capital is the intense and the unfathomable. Hence, the two forms, the novel and the short story, do not gel well beyond a point. Stories do not conform to the demands of plausibility or eternal reality. Walter Benjamin would say that the rise of the novel is a symptom of the decline of storytelling. Isaac Tennyson further notes that in line with Benjamin, Tennyson would say that novel sacrifices the story for the art of narration. And here we are talking about, once again, the stylistic devices, the artistic fineness, the the plot becomes more important than the story itself in the case of the novel. So, according to Tennyson, in novel, a lot of human intervention is visible and possible. Think of the playing with the narratorial voice that is possible in the novel, be it the author, be it the characters, or even playing with the reader's expectation. A lot can be done with a novel, through a novel, in a novel. So, a novel is essentially a human product, according to Tennyson. On the other hand, we have this short story, which is a divine art. So, according to Tennyson, in the beginning was the story, referring to its provenance in the myths, right? In the same way, Russian formalist Boris Eichenbaum looks at the novel as a syncretic form, whereas short story is a fundamental elementary form. Instead of introducing too many characters, the short story needs to tighten sooner due to lack of time and space. Its scope is much narrower when compared to the novel. With all its moral impasse and the ambiguities that the short story wants to pose, the short story does not migrate too far away from a basically compact structure, right? With this, I would like to end today's lecture, and let's meet again for another round of discussions in the ensuing lectures. Thank you.